So we had a look at let and const, but another important field where a big change happened are functions. You probably know the way to write functions like this. I have my function with parentheses, and then I have my function body where I may do something, for example, log hello to the console. And if I now run this function like this, you'll of course see hello. So that isn't too new, but ES6 introduces a new syntax we can use to write our functions. I can rewrite this function here in the following way. I can assign it to a variable, fn, set this equal to, and then I keep the parentheses, but then I use this fat arrow, so this equal sign followed by the greater than sign. And if I now hit run, what do you think will happen? It still works, so this is just a different way to write this function, and I'll explain what happens here. The pair of parentheses here stands for the arguments we want to pass to this function. So in this function we're not passing any arguments, but an important thing to know is we always have to provide the empty pair of parentheses if we're not passing any arguments. Then, separated by this fat arrow, as it is called, you have the function body, and then inside of this body you execute your code. Now, since we're only having one line of code, there's even a shorter way to write this. I can remove the curly braces and simply write the function like this. If I now hit run, you'll still see it works. So again, if I only have one line of code, I may leave out all the rest and write my function like this. Now, while this might look a bit strange, it's simply a shorter way to write our functions, but it also has another feature to which I will come back later. First, I want to talk a little bit more about the syntax and how it works. Here we're printing something with the console, but imagine actually we would expect to get something back from this function which we could print to the console. Now the cool thing is, if all your function does is have one line of code and return something with that line of code, you can also simply write this. So no return keyword or anything like that, just what you want to return. If I now hit run, what do you think we'll see? Well, we see hello. So this function here is technically the same as this function here. Just much shorter, of course. So that's one thing, but what if I do have more code than just one line? Well, then I reintroduce my curly braces here. And then I can do whatever I want to do. For example, I might have my variable a and my variable b, and I want to return a plus b. If I now hit run, what do you think we'll see? We see 5, so we're using this function body like we would use it in a normal function or like in a function we know it from the ES5 syntax. So this works fine, but we also have this shorter way of writing it if we only have the return statement, the way you saw before. Now let's also talk about the arguments. I'm not passing any arguments, and I said that you need to provide this empty pair of parentheses in this case. So how does this change if I actually do pass arguments? Let's say I want to pass a and b to it, so like 3 and 8 for example, and I'm expecting a and b here. And then this is the syntax how I write this. I'm simply passing the arguments inside of the parentheses like I do have it in the traditional function statement you probably know, and then I can call this function. So if I now hit run, we see 11. Now note, of course, that I again can get rid of everything but the a plus b term here, since I'm only having one line and I'm returning this. So if I hit run with that, I also see 11. Now the cool thing is, if I only have one argument, so let's say I don't have b, but this is always 5, so I'm only passing a. What do you think will happen if I call this function like this? Well, I get 8. And what do you think will happen if I still pass another argument? Well, it's ignored. I still get 8. But here's another cool feature. If I only have one argument, then I may leave out the parentheses. And that's important to know. That is the only condition or the only case where I don't need parentheses if I have one argument. If I have no arguments, I need anti-parentheses. If I have 2 or more arguments, I need them too. But if I only pass one argument, I might write this function like this. Very, very short, of course. So if I now hit run, we see 8. And this is the shortest possible way I could think of writing this function, except for maybe trimming out the white space here. So these are arrow functions in its basics, or with the core syntax that is to it. And one advantage you see here right away is that you save characters, that it allows you to write functions in a more concise and shorter way. Of course, I can also use functions like this in, let's say, a callback. So if I have my set timeout function here, I may pass this function like this, and then as the second argument to this set timeout function, I pass the interval, 1000 milliseconds, so to do something after 1 second. Now, of course, here returning something doesn't really suffice, so I will instead simply log hello, and I'll also not get any arguments here, so I'll just pass parentheses like this. And the autocomplete here is really helpful, thank you. So if I now hit run, what do you think will happen? I get hello after 1 second. So this is a place where I could use arrow functions as well. Generally, I can use arrow functions wherever I used normal functions before, as in the end they are just functions, just a different syntax. However, there is one big addition to them that I haven't talked about yet. It's concerning the this keyword in JavaScript. As you might be aware, the this keyword oftentimes is the root of a lot of problems, or a lot of misunderstandings at least, and it can lead to code behavior you were not expecting due to the fact how this is assigned to different parts or different objects. And if you want to learn more about that, definitely Google for some articles on it, or check out my JavaScript Bootcamp course where I will also explain how this works. Now here I'm assuming you are aware of how this works, and I want to show you how it differs with the new syntax, the fat arrow functions, and the old functions.